You know, there's something people don't talk about enough, being alone. Somewhere along the way, we were taught to fear it. We were taught that being alone means being incomplete, that if you're not surrounded by people, or in a relationship, or constantly busy with social things, then something must be wrong with you. But here's the truth, being alone is not a weakness. It's not something to be fixed or pitied. In fact, being alone is one of the most powerful states of being you can ever experience. Because when you are alone, truly alone, with no distractions and no masks to wear, you come face to face with yourself. And that, right there, is where your real power begins. Think about it. When was the last time you sat quietly and just listened to your own thoughts? Not the noise of social media, not the opinions of others, not the pressure to perform or impress. Just you. We spend so much time running away from that silence because we're scared of what it might tell us. But let me tell you something. Silence is where the magic happens. That space, that stillness, that's where you begin to understand who you really are. It's where you figure out what you want, not what you've been told you should want. It's where you start to own your story, your ambition, your dreams, because no one else can write your narrative for you. And the only way to truly hear your own voice is to turn down the volume of everyone else's. There's something fierce about a person who is comfortable in their own company. There's a certain strength in walking into a room, not needing to be validated, not needing to be surrounded, but just being. I had to learn that the hard way. I had to go through moments where I felt like I had no one but myself, and those were the moments that shaped me the most. In those quiet moments, I started realizing that the world may try to define me by its standards, but I don't have to accept that definition. I define myself, and that confidence, that clarity, that sense of self, it didn't come from noise. It didn't come from crowds. It came from silence, from solitude, from being alone. I want you to think about this. When you are alone, you are undistracted, you are raw, you are real, and that is powerful. Because when you strip away the expectations, the filters, the need to perform, you begin to see yourself. And when you truly see yourself, you can begin to trust yourself. That trust is everything. That trust is what will guide you when no one else believes in you. That trust is what will carry you when you doubt yourself. And that trust doesn't come from being surrounded by noise. It comes from being alone with your thoughts, learning to sit in discomfort, learning to face your fears, and realizing that you are your own greatest ally. Some people spend their whole lives trying to avoid being alone. They chase crowds, they settle for relationships that don't serve them, they drown themselves in busyness because the silence feels threatening. But if they could just lean into it, if they could embrace the solitude instead of resisting it, they'd discover something transformative. They'd discover that they don't need external noise to feel full. They just need internal peace. And look, I'm not saying it's always easy. Sometimes being alone forces you to face emotions you've buried for years. It forces you to ask hard questions, but that's where growth lives. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from confrontation. It comes from that moment when you say, okay, I'm scared, I'm hurt, I feel lost, but I'm still standing, and I'm going to figure it out. That's the power of solitude. It reveals your resilience. It sharpens your instincts, it builds your backbone, and once you find peace in being alone, no one can take that away from you, because you're no longer dependent on the world to tell you who you are. You already know, and when you know who you are, when you truly know, you become unstoppable. You don't settle, you don't shrink, you don't compromise the essence of who you are for the sake of fitting in. You walk in your truth, and that energy, that unshakable self-awareness, is what changes everything. So don't be afraid to be alone. Don't run from it. Sit with it. Own it. Let it show you what you're made of. Because in that space where it's just you, you'll find something deeper than strength. You'll find power, the kind that can't be given and definitely can't be taken. That's where your story begins, with you. You know, one of the hardest but most important lessons I've learned is this. Your worth isn't tied to anyone else. Not your friends, not your partner, not your family, not society, not your followers, not your likes, not your job title. Your worth is yours, and yours alone. It sounds simple, but we are conditioned from such a young age to seek validation outside ourselves. We're praised when we make others happy. We're told we're beautiful when someone else says so. We feel important when we're needed, wanted, admired, and sure, all of that feels good. Who doesn't love a compliment or recognition? But the danger is when that external approval becomes the only thing holding you up. Because what happens when it's not there? What happens when the applause stops? When the people who used to lift you up disappear? When the relationship ends? Or the job falls through? Or the friends don't show up the way you expected them to? Does your value disappear with them? No, absolutely not. But it feels like it does when you haven't built that value inside yourself first. We've been sold this lie that we are only as good as our relationships or our networks or how many people choose us. But here's the truth. Being chosen by others means nothing if you haven't chosen yourself first. There is a quiet revolution that happens the moment you stop waiting for someone else to tell you you're worthy. When you look in the mirror and you don't see someone broken or not enough or in need of fixing, but someone whole, someone strong, someone deserving of every damn good thing, that's when your power starts to rise. You are not defined by how others see you. Their lens is limited. Their perception is colored by their own fears, insecurities, biases. And sometimes the people who are closest to you can't even see your light because they're too busy sitting in their own shadows. But that's not your job to fix. Your job is to keep shining anyway. It's so easy to fall into the trap of comparison, of feeling like we have to keep up, prove ourselves, fit into some perfect mold that was never meant for us in the first place. And when you're alone, especially after a breakup or a loss or a disappointment, it's tempting to question your worth, to think if I was good enough, they would have stayed, or if I mattered, I wouldn't feel this alone. But that's a false story. One that was written by fear, not truth, because let me tell you something, being alone doesn't diminish your value, it reveals it. It shows you who you are without the noise, without the distractions, without the need to perform. And what you'll find is someone resilient, someone radiant, someone real. You just have to stop looking outside for answers and start trusting the voice inside. That voice, it's been whispering to you all along, telling you that you're more than your heartbreak, more than your job title, more than the opinions of people who never really knew your heart. That voice is your guide, your compass, your truth. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you realize you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You don't have to shrink to be liked. You don't have to bend over backwards to be accepted. You don't have to chase people who treat your presence like it's optional, because once you know your worth, you start moving differently. You stop settling, you stop over-explaining, you stop waiting for permission. You begin to understand that your energy is sacred, your time is valuable, and not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone gets to be in your life just because they want to be. They have to earn it, just like you've worked hard to earn your own self-respect. And let's be honest, loving yourself in a world that profits from your insecurity, that's revolutionary, it's rebellious. But it's also necessary, because when you know your worth, you stop begging people to love you. You stop auditioning for roles that were never written for you. You stop asking rooms to make space for you. You walk in and take your space. So if you're in a season of being alone right now, if you're healing, if you're rediscovering who you are, good, let that be the foundation. Let that be the time you stop tying your value to someone else's ability to see it. You are not someone's second choice. You are not a placeholder. You are not defined by what didn't work out. You are not broken. You are becoming. And in becoming, you are learning the most powerful lesson of all. You are enough. Without applause, without a relationship, without a title, just as you are, that kind of knowing, it's unshakable, you know. There's something incredibly powerful about silence, but we don't give it enough credit. We think silence means emptiness, that it's boring or lonely, but I've come to believe that silence is one of the most creative, transformative forces in our lives, if we learn how to use it. See, when life gets quiet, when you're no longer distracted by constant company, noise, or even chaos, you start to hear things you've never heard before. You start to hear yourself and that voice that's the one you've been drowning out for years. It's in the silence that your real voice is born, not the one molded by expectation or fear or the need to be liked. I'm talking about the voice that comes from your gut, the one that doesn't apologize for being too ambitious or too emotional or too loud or too soft. The one that knows what it wants even when the world doesn't agree. But here's the thing, most people never give themselves the chance to find that voice. We're always filling space with conversations, with content, with comparison. We jump from one thing to the next, scroll, 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 never realizing we're avoiding the one thing that could change everything, stillness. Being alone gives you that stillness. It clears the clutter. It creates space to think, to dream, to build. And if you're brave enough to sit in that space, to lean into that discomfort, you'll start to feel something shift. You'll stop mimicking and start creating. You'll stop performing and start being. That's where vision is born. That's where big, crazy, beautiful ideas take shape. Ideas that aren't meant to be whispered but shouted from rooftops. And they don't come from other people's opinions. They don't come from social trends or popular choices. They come from you, from deep, soulful, solitary reflection. The silence is your lab. It's where you experiment with your identity, where you ask the hard questions. What do I want? What do I believe in? What makes me feel alive? And guess what? The answers aren't always immediate. Sometimes it takes time, but that process is worth every second, because once your voice starts to rise, it gets clearer. It gets stronger, and suddenly you're not afraid to use it anymore. You speak up, not just when it's easy, but when it's necessary. You advocate for yourself. You say no when something doesn't align. You say yes only when it sets your soul on fire. That's not ego, that's alignment, that's power. Some people will misunderstand your silence. They'll think you're lost or unsure or fading away. Let them. They have no idea what you're building. They don't see the inner architect at work, designing a life with purpose. They don't hear the voice you're nurturing, one that doesn't need validation to speak, one that isn't afraid of being misunderstood. In fact, solitude teaches you something even more important than speaking. It teaches you when not to. It gives you discernment. You learn not every battle needs to be fought. Not every opinion deserves a response. You learn to choose your moments with precision, and when you do speak, your words land harder, because they come from truth, not impulse. When you've spent time alone building your voice, you become unshakable. You stop saying things just to be heard. You speak because what you have to say matters, because it's rooted in experience, in clarity, in authenticity. That's how leaders are born, not in crowded rooms, but in quiet ones. Not in constant affirmation, but in solitude that demands you find your own answers. The silence becomes your strength, and your voice, it becomes your legacy. So don't be afraid of the quiet. Don't rush to fill it. Let it work on you. Let it challenge you. Let it show you what you're made of. You know, we spend so much of our lives running from our feelings, especially the heavy ones, the sadness, the fear, the anger, the self-doubt. We're told to stay positive, to keep smiling, to move on and be strong, like it's some kind of performance. But let me tell you something real. True strength isn't pretending everything's fine. It's facing what isn't. It's letting yourself feel the full weight of your emotions, and then choosing to rise anyway, because those feelings you're so afraid of, they're not your enemies, they're messages. They're invitations to pause, to reflect, to heal. But we live in a world that teaches us to numb and distract. We scroll past our pain, drown it in work or noise or company, hoping it'll just go away on its own. But it never does. Not really. It waits. It waits for silence, it waits for solitude, and when you're finally alone, it shows up and says, "Now can we talk?" Being alone brings all of that to the surface. That's why it's so powerful, because it's honest. You can't lie to yourself when it's just you. You can't hide behind people or distractions or routine. You're left with your truth, and yes, sometimes it's raw, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's also where your transformation begins. I've had moments, real, quiet, personal moments, where I felt overwhelmed by self-doubt, where everything I had built felt like it could collapse, where I questioned who I was and what I was even doing. And in those moments, I realized something. Those emotions weren't there to destroy me. They were there to redirect me, to push me inward, to force me to listen to what I had been ignoring for too long. See, you don't grow in the absence of pain, you grow through it. You grow when you stop resisting and start listening, when you ask, "Why do I feel this way?" instead of, "How can I shut this off?" You begin to understand that negative emotions aren't a sign of weakness. They're a part of the process. They show you what still needs attention, where you're holding back, and what's no longer serving you. And when you face those feelings head on, something incredible happens. They start to lose their power over you. You realize that fear doesn't have to paralyze you. Sadness doesn't have to consume you. Anger doesn't have to define you. You can feel all of it without becoming any of it. That's when everything starts to shift. Because you're no longer driven by what you're avoiding. You're moved by what you're embracing. You start turning pain into fuel. You channel heartbreak into creativity. You transform fear into focus. You use disappointment as a compass that points you towards something deeper, something real. There's a fire that comes from surviving your own storms, from walking through the dark and coming out not only standing, but standing taller. And once you've done that, once you've really sat with yourself in your most vulnerable, unfiltered moments, you'll never again be afraid of your own reflection. You'll respect it. You'll honor it. It's in those moments of pain that we discover our resilience. Not the surface kind, the performative kind, but the deep, soul-rooted kind. The kind that says, even when I'm hurting, I'm healing. Even when I feel broken, I'm rebuilding. Even when I'm unsure, I'm still moving. That's power. Real, unapologetic power. So the next time you feel those emotions creeping in, the doubt, the sadness, the loneliness, don't rush to silence them. Sit with them. Ask them what they came to teach you. Let them guide you inward, not backward. Let them show you just how much capacity you really have, because you're not fragile, you're fierce, you're not falling apart, you're evolving, and every emotion you survive is proof that you're stronger than you think. That's how you turn pain into purpose. That's how you rise, not by avoiding what hurts, but by facing it, owning it, and using it to fuel the next chapter of your story, and you will rise.